distinguished colleagues and friends. I just want to say how happy I am, and particularly to be home. And I want to thank the International Human Rights Exchange of the School of Social Studies and the Wits Law School for inviting me here. And of course, I've been assigned a subject to address you on. And as students here know, when you're given a topic, you stick to that topic. Unfortunately, I also would prefer a robust exchange with you, because I think it's of mutual benefit for you to hear from me and for me to hear from you. I'm sure that many of you are expecting to have me address issues of burning concern in the world, but I'm going to stay with my topic because for the past 5 years, as I served as High Commissioner for Human Rights, we've just been moving from crisis to crisis, so it's not often that I have an opportunity to step back and take a longer perspective on our work. And you have given me that opportunity today by assigning this topic, Human Rights Achievements and Challenges in a Rapidly Changing World. And I think that Professor Jayachan will find some time for an exchange amongst us here after this lecture. So do bear with me as I deliver this lecture. The mandate of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is to protect and promote all the human rights and fundamental freedoms to which everyone in the world is entitled. And it seems to me that this universally accepted baseline concept of human rights is in itself one of the greatest human achievements in history. The basic economic, social, political, cultural, and civic elements which underpin the opportunity to live free from fear and free from want are not a reward for good behavior. They are not country-specific or particular to a certain era or social group. They are the inalienable entitlements of all people at all times and in all places, people of every color, from every ethnic and national group, whether they are disabled or migrants, no matter their gender or sexual orientation. Now, I'm sure this sounds simple and straightforward to you. You will not believe how many times I have to raise this when I'm continually urged by state authorities to not touch a particular issue, because it's either country-specific or it's not something that accords with their religion or custom. And I say I cannot leave anyone, because the Universal Declaration doesn't say just look after these people, but you can forget about women or LGBT people or people with albinism or whatever. I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of individuals in history do not enjoy their basic human rights to freedom and dignity. Life has been chaotic and cruel, and it has been in reaction to some of history's most horrific extremes of oppression. For example, the transatlantic slave trade, the Nazi Holocaust, and our experience in this country of apartheid, that our modern system of universal human rights has taken shape and is still taking shape. Let me look at now the flexible and comprehensive human rights system that has developed and which I call an achievement. Firstly, the treaties. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948 by the UN General Assembly, was the first truly global expression of our human rights. In fact, it is the most translated document in the whole world. In 1966, the General Assembly added 2 more detailed treaties, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and together, these 3 treaties form what is sometimes called the International Bill of Rights. Since then, the member states of the United Nations have continued to add elements, extending the architecture of our international human rights system to become both wider and deeper. Wider, more inclusive, thanks to new international treaties in which states agree to take action on important specific topics. Two conventions which entered into force in 1969 and 1981 aim to eliminate all forms of racial discrimination and discrimination against women. Another, which entered into force in 1987, prohibits torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Entering into force in 1990, 2003, and 2006, other conventions specifically address the rights of the child, the rights of migrant workers and their families, the rights of persons with disabilities, and the protection of all persons from enforced disappearance. The system has also grown deeper, thanks to a range of human rights mechanisms that ensure the practical enforcement of the principles established by the treaties which I've just listed. They include treaty bodies to monitor implementation of the conventions by states that are party to them, and panels to look into human rights complaints by individuals. A constantly asked question is, all right, so you have the rhetoric, you have the normative framework, how do we get states to comply with this framework that they set up? So therefore, I want to focus on some of the human rights mechanisms that are now in place to get states to implement their obligations. Let's begin with the tribunals. Greater depth has also been assured in recent years by the work of extra-national tribunals, including regional human rights courts and the International Criminal Tribunal. Regional courts of human rights have been set up in the context of the Council of Europe, the European Court of Human Rights in 1959, by the Organization of American States, the Inter-American Court, and by the African Union, the African Court on Human and People's Rights, set up in 2004. These courts contribute to enforcing international human rights norms, and they further develop those norms through their rulings. This is why, it's because I appreciate these regional mechanisms that I regret very much that SADC Tribunal for Human Rights has been virtually rendered null and void by the SADC presidents, and I'm urging them to set up that court again. Additionally, in 1993 and 1994, the UN set up two international criminal tribunals to try genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. And in 1998, the present International Criminal Court was established, and this has been a particularly key development. I am aware that some people have criticized the International Criminal Court for having exercised its jurisdiction so far, mostly in African countries. But this criticism fails to acknowledge that several preliminary examinations are underway in places outside Africa, including Afghanistan and Colombia, and the state of Palestine has also submitted a complaint to the ICC. And moreover, most of the situations examined by the ICC are referred to it by the countries concerned, namely African states. Two exceptions are Darfur and Libya, which were referred to the court by the UN Security Council. Most importantly, the victims of the crimes examined by the court in all these African situations are African children, women, and men. They rightly are the ICC's focus. The work of these international tribunals is important to ensuring accountability for human rights violations. They send the unequivocal message that no one is above the law and that victims of abuse everywhere have the right to seek justice and redress. This is an immense achievement, and it has all been done in the past 20 years. So there was no international system of accountability since Nuremberg, And we, particularly on our continent, saw violators, massive violators, getting shelter in other countries and resorts, and there was no accountability. And therefore, we welcome this achievement. Let me now speak a bit about the Human Rights Council, which I service. This is another cornerstone in this perhaps complex but also very flexible and resilient architecture that has been established by the UN General Assembly in 2006. This Human Rights Council is composed of 47 member states, and they are elected by all the states, and they are members for rotating periods. South Africa was a member, but when their term expired, they now have observer status. The Council has addressed a range of often sensitive human rights issues such as corruption. Resolution 19/38 notes that, and I quote, "The enjoyment of human rights, be they economic, social, and cultural, or civil and political, in particular the right to development, is seriously undermined by the phenomenon of corruption, which may endanger the stability and security of societies, undermine the values of democracy and morality, and jeopardize social, economic, and political development." So that's a quote from an intergovernmental body, words that we are accustomed to hear from civil society organizations. In addition, the Human Rights Council mandates international commissions of inquiry and names independent experts to monitor and document human rights violations in countries. Known as special rapporteurs, they carry out country investigations into areas of human rights crisis, such as Israel's occupation of Palestine or the crisis in Syria, and investigate global issues such as the sale of children or enforced disappearances or the delivery of the right to water. We currently have 2 South African nationals who have been elected as experts. The Human Rights Council has been particularly notable for its Universal Periodic Review, a remarkable process that examines the human rights record and has examined the records of all 193 member states of the United Nations without exception. So under this UPR, we call it, which is a peer government by states of each other's records, governments take charge of assessing and challenging each other's detailed submissions regarding human rights across a number of topics, including women's rights and domestic violence. I can assure you that this is an often very powerful process, ensuring a degree of scrutiny of government policies and actions that would have been unthinkable even a decade ago. My office prepares the human rights report of each of the countries that undergo the UPR. We work with governments, with civil society organizations, with national human rights commissions, with academics, and with the rest of the UN country team. And we gather all this information and put it out there. The proceedings when a state is examined is webcast so the people in the country concerned can view it, and NGOs from the country concerned can participate in the debate. Well, it is a bit unsatisfactory at the moment because they just have a minute to speak and they limit it to about 4 in number, but I am pushing for greater participation by civil society. Now to my own office, which we call OHCHR, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. As a kind of arch that spans and protects a great part of this architecture, there is my office. This body was established 20 years ago by the United Nations so that an independent, authoritative voice would speak out against human rights violations wherever they occur. So it's not only speaking out, but taking measures to protect these rights, which means we do a great deal of technical cooperation and assistance. We bring the weight of the United Nations to the support of civil society organizations and individual human rights defenders around the world, and we lend our voice to the voiceless. With field presences in 58 countries and staff of more than 1,000, my office promotes and protects human rights through advocacy, by monitoring and documenting human rights situations, by training national and international actors, and by assisting national authorities to shape new policies and laws. We have also built a rapid response team to deploy personnel in human rights crises. We had to do that in respect of Syria, Mali, and Central African Republic more recently. This is then the international human rights system we have in place. It is a dynamic construction with a remarkable capacity for adaptation and extension as new challenges emerge, and I'll be addressing a few of these areas in a moment. First, however, I want to emphasize that this is not only legal or philosophical framework. The main achievement of our human rights system is that it has saved and improved lives. Because of this system, uncountable numbers of people have gained independence, have secured freedom from torture or unlawful imprisonment, and have been given aid or protection from prejudice and from harm. These are ideas and norms that have changed the world. However, they have not abolished abuse. They have not eradicated poverty. As my office grapples daily, even hourly, with cases of entirely avoidable human suffering, it may even seem that the global human rights situation is getting worse. Sometimes our work reminds me of something that Nelson Mandela wrote in his autobiography. I quote, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." I breathe a certain confidence in my mandate and in my work because we work so closely with civil society organizations all over the world. And now I'm even more encouraged because of the social media, where millions of people are now able to reach us, and we are able to reach them. So now that I have enumerated the progress of the international human rights system over the past 65 years, but more particularly in the past 20 years, I will rest for a moment on the peak of that great series of hills we have climbed and take a look at the horizon to see if I can make out some of the hills that lie ahead in the mist.